Hello and welcome to Deep In Pact, a proud member of the Duff Network, where we dive deep into Arbo's most bibliophilic work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Possession 15.7, to the penultimate Possession chapter. And yeah, it starts out with Peter just confirming for us that yes, Faysal, who is an angel, is siding with the demons here.
Oh, yeah, it's a great opening to sort of, put us straight back in that mindset of, oh yeah, that's right, we're pretty fucked because Faysal's joining the demons. It totally makes sense that Peter's the one doing this.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great way to sort of launch us straight back into how fucked everything is.
Yep.
And I really like sort of the way Faysal talks around so much of what was established in 14.x, like his interlude. In fact, and it's something we didn't quite touch on so explicitly, but like angels like Faysal, they don't see themselves as explicitly the opposite of the demons right now. Like Faysal, we talked about how he'd shifted to seeing humans as kind of their more of their counterpart, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, well, Faysal's still sort of long-term anti-demon. He's not as directly opposed to demons anymore. Like humans are kind of this middleman in the war as far as he's concerned. So it totally makes sense that, he's willing to help the demons to, pack them up quicker and, take care of a few humans on the side. What a bonus.
Yeah, it's a bit of a win-win, huh?
Yeah, I still wonder, like, because obviously we know he's 7th choir.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. I wonder how First Choir or any of the others feel about this sort of stuff. Like, I think we talked about that, but like I could see First Choir angels being quite straightforward and basic when it comes to this stuff. Like how was so kind of simple and in their power in Arc 7. I could see First Choir angels being sort of the same type of idea.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're left with this tricky guy to deal with. And the start of this chapter kind of, you see a bit of, I don't know, of I guess the desperation that's going through Rose's head. Like, she was already basically scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of needing to summon Faysal. That was her last ditch thing. And that's so obviously a failure that she is now in full-on desperation mode.
Yep, but luckily, we know someone who's pretty good at coping in that mode, and he's willing to give her a hand in that regard.
Yes, and it even without Blake giving her a hand, it does seem that they're just very good at, their best plans are the plans that they come up with after everything else is beyond fucked.
Yeah, that's true. It seems to just be a bit of a staple of these two, doesn't it? Clawing their way out of the abyss.
Yes, exactly right. Metaphorically and literally. So, yeah, Blake kind of sees Rose is starting to think of something, but doesn't really know exactly what it is. And so he starts digging through her memories to try and figure out what she's up to so that he can help out.
I love this sort of way of communicating that they start to establish where, Blake shoves ideas literally onto Rosa's side of the fracture to make her think of things. And, whereas she just sort of has to try and think along lines and like it's this really symbolic, abstract way of communicating that's very fun. Like, you can tell normal spirits would probably hate it. Like, it's, we already talked about how they hate emoji. This is so much worse than that.
Yes.
It reminds me of Alistair's cards in a way, like the alethiometer.
Yeah,
which
totally.
I think we talked about back then as well. Like this whole idea of very abstract, interpretive communication. It's really fun.
Yes. Yeah, and of course that could lead to miscommunications, but when you're communicating with what is effectively yourself, you know that you're probably going to send the right message, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with these two because it's yourself, but it's also very much not yourself. Like,
yes.
It's totally... You'd have to get it just right. Like, I think that's a really fun line to walk. I'm kind of bummed because even if Blake is going to be in Rose's soul for the rest of the story, this is so cool, and I feel like they're just going to be under the pump. Like, this would have just been a really interesting, chapter or so of in a calm setting, just them learning to communicate in this
Yeah.
method. Like,
But when has there ever been a calm setting in Pact?
well, yeah, that's fair. I think there was that one time in Mara's forest before it all went to shit. But yeah, no, you're right. It's like, you know, I could see this mechanic, and I think I talked about this when he first sort of ended up possessing her. This alone just feels like something you could explore for a couple of chapters, and I love it. And like, yeah, this possession's so cool. I'm just kind of bummed it's coming to the story when it has, because I want more.
Yeah, definitely. So part of the memories that Blake is digging through are Rose's kind of interpretations of the things that have been left for them by Granny Rose. And I swear, ever since, you know, the very first chapter, you're set up to absolutely hate Granny Rose. I think with, you know, good cause. But every time we learn more about her, she's endeared to me more and more. So, for example, here, our Rose, young Rose, I guess, with the entity formerly known as Mirrors, is reading through Granny Rose's diaries and noticing that Granny Rose will kind of think her way up to rebellious thoughts, but then there'll be this kind of absence where, you know, there'll be a tangent off in another direction, or the diary entry will stop. And it's so clear that she doesn't feel safe writing these what she would have as rebellious thoughts in her diary, which is such an interesting bit of characterization of Granny Rose being very similar to Blake and Rose in fighting against the system in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, I love how immediately it jumps out to you know, a young Rose Jr.
Yeah.
as like something that needs to be read between the lines. Like,
Yeah.
it's so clearly been set up as something that she's like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here.
Yeah.
This actually, like, anyone who follows my live reads will know, like, I got very excited at this point because I was like, ooh, are we going to have like a Rose Senior Pages interlude next where we have to like read between the lines? Unfortunately, it kind of seems like those bits have already been resolved, and you know, like, I'm sure I'll enjoy whatever's coming next, but I got very excited for that idea. Like, that would have been a really interesting idea for a chapter, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And it would have worked because, you know, it's like we started with a Rose diary entry and we can finish with one.
Yeah, nice and circular. But yeah, it's just, I wish we could get more Rose Senior, because she's such an interesting character. And it feels like there's still so much about, you know, the way she decided to go about all this that we don't understand.
Yeah, like, we definitely know more than enough to understand Blake and Rose's journey, but it's one of those things where, you know, more prequel fleshing out wouldn't be received badly.
Yes, definitely. Before we move on, I want to talk on. There's this one really funny line where Rose says, "I did call you for a reason," to Faysal, and Faysal says, "Of course." And it's so obvious that Rose is just saying this to buy time. Like, she has no idea what the fuck she's going to do next. The reason that she called Faysal at this point seems to have been because she fucked up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like, it's such a nonsense statement. I did call you for a reason. That reason could be like anything, you know. Like,
Yes.
like it's a bit of a non-statement. It means absolutely nothing. And
Yes.
Faysal just kind of is like, okay, like, well,
Yeah, get to it.
Let's hear it. Kind of just calls her out on it. It's great.
But luckily, Rose does eventually realize what her own plan is, and in a pretty baller move, out of the blue, she declares herself and Alastair as the Lord and Lady of Jacob's Bell. And this is an insane plan, right?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, obviously, it kind of works out, but I really do love it as this idea of, you know, all this has been for so long over the lordship, and then in, you know, at the end of Arc 14, everyone kind of decided they didn't really want it anymore anyway.
Yep.
They were basically going to give it to Johannes just because he had the only bit left that was worth having.
Yeah, I mean, who wants to be lord of a trash heap, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So it's so funny that it's sort of now come back as this kind of insane play that it's just like, oh, I'm going to be the Lord. And it's like, you know, and everyone else is like, okay, you have it. I mean, that's not even helpful right now.
Yep.
Like, it's just such a fun play on something that so many people were striving for so long in this book.
Yes. Yeah, it's a fun way to bring it back. And the thing about this is, from basically this point onwards, the rest of the chapter is just really confusing, right? Like, it's really hard to follow what this plan that Rose seems to have thought of is, because Blake isn't following it until the very end. And it's an interesting dynamic where we're kind of used to everyone else having to play along to Blake's shenanigans, I guess. And we get to see Rose pulling some shenanigans of her own here, and I love the way it unfolds.
Yeah, you're right, because it's basically just after this point, I think that Blake sort of injects her with his instinct powers,
Yes.
and it's like exactly we kind of get to see one step removed how insane these Blake plans are, because I 100% for most of this chapter, my first time reading through it, I had absolutely no idea where the fuck things were going. Like,
Yeah.
Rose would say someone, and a few people would be like, "Oh, I see," and Blake was offering nothing. I was like, "I don't see at all." And this was one of those chapters where I'm very glad that we're doing this podcast because I get to read it twice. And like the second time, I think I understood it like a lot better. Like in retrospect, the whole idea of calling everyone from Toronto at first is just because it puts Faysal on the hook because he can't be seen to be working with the lawyers. Because obviously, that's very bad PR. And that is a callback straight to when very early on in the chapter, Rose thinks that the weakness of the Diabolists is that they have no allies, and that didn't really click for me because of the way Rose goes about it and Blake
Yes.
isn't following. And it wasn't until the second time that I was like, oh, okay, I see why this is a good plan.
Yeah, because being associated with demons leads to radiation, PR radiation.
Yeah, exactly. So Faysal, and I mean, Faysal just decides that he reckons him and Miss Lewis can just kill them before anyone shows up, so it'll be fine.
Yeah, which is great. So yeah, Mrs. Lewis and Faisal kind of work together, I guess, to figure out that this plan has more to it and it's connected to Toronto, which is wild.
I mean, yeah, it was one of those things where it was kind of validating for me how bonkers a plan this is because even Miss Lewis and Faisal like, what? So wait, you okay? Even they're sort of struggling to piece it together, and I was like, okay, cool, it's not just me.
Yeah.
This is so insane. Even the angel and the super demon lawyer can't figure it out immediately.
Yeah. And the other fun thing about this plan is it immediately diffuses the situation where Blake and Conquest are fighting, because Conquest just seems to be completely satisfied that he's basically one step away from becoming lord of a region again.
Yeah, well, I guess he's partially lord of the region, right? Because he's taken over a decent chunk of Rose. And it's funny how, yeah, I guess getting what he wants allows him to have more power, which I guess allows him to just chill the fuck out a bit. I mean, it's funny, like, listening to the conversation he has with Blake here, I'd forgotten how just kind of purely a single concept he is and, like, how unashamed he is. Like,
Yeah.
like Conquest is kind of open about his all his faults. Like, there's the bit where he starts to quote Macbeth and Blake's like, isn't that hypocritical? And Conquest's like, yeah, but, like, that's me. And it's just, I've forgotten how just single-minded and unapologetic Conquest is at being Conquest.
Yeah, I've missed Conquest as a character. He's so... Yeah, he's just purely him, He's so not able to be ascribed human motivations to.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's interesting how in a story that mostly has incredibly sort of complex and, character or bad guys with like really complex motivations, some of the standouts are really just the ones where it's just, he's Conquest, he does all the Conquest things,
Yeah.
like, simultaneously super easy to predict but still kind of surprising and really fun the way it works out. It's kind of the same with the barber. Like it's really like impressive how Wildbow can take what is a bad guy that can be boiled down to like a one sentence summary or a one word summary of what they are and still make it incredibly interesting.
Yes, I agree. So yeah, as you mentioned, Faisal basically thinks, well, the only thing we can do now is try and kill Rose before Toronto gets here. And so the attack begins again. And this time it seems to be the gloves are mostly off, right? Yeah, and so you can tell even these motes are pretty horrifying. We get this line where the attack begins and we read, people in the group were screaming. Rose realized she was among them. And this is such a perfect pair of lines because it really sums up like the complete terror, but also the weird mindfuckery and abstraction that exists with these demons. Like they're so horrifying that you can't help but scream, but also you're so out of it you can't even realize that you're the one that is screaming.
Yeah, well, I mean that's sort of the other side of it is when you start to pile multiple little motes like this on top of each other. I kind of lost the ability to track at all what was happening because they upset the natural order on such fundamental levels that
Yeah.
it's hard to imagine what a single mode is doing. Whereas like when 4 or 5 of them's effects were just sort of listed off, I was just kind of like, I think my imagination just kind of broke, and I was like, okay, it's just all real fucked. Like that's it's real bad. Like everything is being torn. Like they have laughs that sort of scrape the inside of your ears and stuff. Like you're right, they hit you so hard and they affect things so wrongly that you don't even notice what you're doing in response.
Yeah, and it really plays into the general confusion of this scene, right? Like, it just is messy in a great way.
Absolutely.
So Blake's response to this is, well, it's more of an implication. The text implies here that Blake basically starts feeding more and more of his personality to Rose to help her kind of last. There's a line where it's not confirmed that he gives this to her, but he thinks about what he could give her and then thinks instinct, gut, that which had allowed me to survive while homeless, to get away from Carl, to fight. And so, we've talked about the key things that define Blake's character, and these memories that are being referenced here, his homelessness, his scrappiness, his encounters with Carl, his desire to fight, like, these are the quintessential Blake bits. And he doesn't give those memories away, but he gives away the kind of, the elements of himself that let him get through these situations. So we're basically not even one step removed, half a step removed from Blake giving up the most core parts of his personality.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you talked about it being an implication. I definitely took that as well. Like, I kind of assumed that this text was telling us that he is giving this stuff up. It's like, we got him back from the abyss for 2 chapters.
Yay!
But he's already pumping it away again.
Yeah.
Yeah. We sort of talked about it last chapter. It really hurts to see Blake giving such important bits of himself away. And especially, you're right, with this one, it's almost a blink and you'll miss it thing. He just quickly thinks about it, and there's not much attention drawn to the fact that he's doing it, but I get the impression he is.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And, yeah, I don't know what we have left. Like, when he gives this stuff away, really the only thing he hasn't given away at this point is his relationship with Green Eyes and Evan. And it feels like that's the final step,
Yeah, just about.
So, Blake gives this stuff to Rose, and with her, her new instinct and her gut and the combined effort of all the gathered practitioners, as well as the fact that they're now a lord and lady, they're able to hold off the motes for a little bit. Which buys enough time for Rose to talk to Faysal again, and she manages to convince him. She manages to convince him of how bad this situation could be for him, and turn him back on side.
Yep. So before we go any further with any of this, I just want to give a special shout out to Ty and Tiff, who fucking, they're really the ones who saved the day. They're the first ones who buy everyone some time with their fucking, like sympathetic magic diagram shenanigans. It's a really great moment because, I think Rose does something, and then Ty and Tiff just come out of nowhere as like they've been doing shit this whole time, which is so impressive given the circumstances.
Yeah, who knew? Friends, they're good, not just tools, Rose. Yes, and of course we get these great bits by Rose where she kind of puts it together that the fact that Faysal is still a dog and still kind of hanging around means he is not separate from Johannes. Johannes is still conceptually existing, which can only mean that the barber still in Johannes has enough of a tie to Faysal, which implies a lot of bad things. It implies a familiar, a domain, and an implement. And altogether, that is not good.
Who would have thought that Faysal's plan could have been a bad idea?
Yeah.
I bet I didn't quite see this coming, but he's an idiot for not seeing it coming, I reckon.
Yeah, he didn't put it together, did he?
Yeah, but you're right. This is obviously many layers of bad for Faysal. I'm not quite sure how he gets out of it, but I really like the bit, as Rose is sort of trying to convince Faysal, Miss Lewis jumps in for a sec, and there's this implied like extensive history between the two of them.
Yes.
In theory, it could just have been from the last few years while Faysal's here, but I like to imagine that these two have bumped into each other like numerous times over the decades or even centuries.
Yeah.
It gave me like Good Omens vibes, honestly.
Yes, it did, except evil. They're not good, they're bad Good Omens.
Yeah, you're right. It's bad omens. At the very least, it's just a fun little bit of world building to, the whole idea of Faysal coming in as a baddie was because these big powerful forces tend to end up, either aligning or fighting directly against each other, and so of course these two have bumped into each other in the past.
Yeah. It's fun. Speaking of fun bits, after Faysal is on side, he brings in all of the Toronto practitioners, and we basically get this portals in Avengers Endgame kind of scene, right?
Yes.
It's all of the characters that we know and love stepping through, and it's such a happy moment when you're just like, oh shit, it's them! Oh, they're here too! Oh, cool, they're here! Like setting up the fact that these characters that we really grew to love over those 4 or 5 arcs are back and here to take part in the end of the world.
Yeah, you're right. It's so good. It really does feel like that bit in Endgame. Just everyone coming back in. It really sort of delivers. Yeah, I also love sort of how Rose continues her sort of Mad Lad conquest type speak when the sisters arrive, and they're like, "Oh wow, this town's shit," and she's like, "Thank you," and then explains like why that's a good thing. It really adds to that sense of like all the characters coming back and it just sort of being a big moment.
Yep.
And I think like again, the reason this works so well is something we'll get into in just a sec, but like something that's reestablished here is this idea that the people in Toronto and in these stable places tend to ignore the problems that are bubbling under the surface.
Yeah.
And that was so much of what we talked about back when the story was there.
Yeah, specifically around Conquest, right? And the idea that they'd all just kind of let him be for a long time.
Yeah, and and the hyena.
Yeah.
Like it was a real recurring beat there, and we used to talk about it a lot, and I kind of thought maybe we'd been misunderstanding it when those sorts of threads seem to get dropped a lot when we came back to Jacob's Bell, but it's been waiting for this moment. Like what Walbo's done is he's brought Toronto back into the story, and he's thematically brought it in as well, and I think that's why this feels so good, or just so solid and so satisfying.
Yeah.
That Toronto's come back in every way into the story.
Yes, and very much this is the thing that Rose touches on towards the end of this chapter is you can't just ignore problems anymore. I'm going to actively force your hand.
Yeah, although, to be fair, the last time someone did that, it was Blake, and that didn't go well for him, so it's a risky strap. I also love this because like this was Blake's whole thing last chapter. He gave her the ability to consider allies.
Yes.
And Rose's response to that is, okay, I'm going to drag everyone under the bus with me. And
does she? I don't think she understands the concept of allies quite yet.
Yeah, but it's so good, and it's exactly what Blake. That's the thing. It actually is very Blake because, in a way, it mirrors what he did to his friends, right? When he awoke them. Like this is how Blake does allies. He does tend to use them a little bit. He gave Rose that ability from the looks of it because she's just, as I said, she's gathered everyone up and she's jumping on a cliff while holding onto them.
Yeah.
Tied them all to her and jumped straight into that pond.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild move, which is, I mean, that's what this chapter is. It's the chapter of Rose pulling the wild stunts.
Well, Blake gave her his instinct abilities to complement her planning abilities, and we're seeing how like utterly insane those two things are when finally combined.
Yeah, imagine Ross or Rusty as a whole practitioner in this story. Can you even imagine what the fuck they would be doing? Some real bonkers shit.
I mean, it's interesting because, there are bits of Blake that were cut out, right? Like we mentioned was it last chapter that half of his memories of his friends were just completely discarded. Like, I wonder if that's part of it, like Ross might have been less effective, but it's kind of the two parts that were kept are both individually more effective.
Well, maybe the parts that were cut out included, some fucking restraint and common sense.
Yeah, ability to self-reflect and stop falling for the same pattern.
Yeah,
Yeah,
gosh.
exactly.
So, of course, the best part of this chapter is Peter's response when he sees Paige with Isadora, which is a payoff to something that we've kind of been wanting to see for ages, right? Peter notices not only is Paige here and a part of this, she's clearly deeper into this world and has known about it for longer than he did, which is so great, and he's so salty about it.
Oh, he's incredibly salty about it. It's fantastic. I hope there is time to explore this a bit more next arc.
Yeah. So yeah, Rose kind of briefly explains the situation here. She wants to let Jacob's bell sink. Toronto basically needs to help clean it up, or this problem is going to become their problem.
Yeah, well, and she's basically made it their problem.
Yes.
It's the classic Wildbow protagonist method of teamwork by force. It's great.
Yes. I want to read out the end of this chapter because I think it is my favorite conclusion to a chapter.
It's really good.
So they're talking about how Toronto is now a part of this, and Rose says they were always a part of it. They just turned a blind eye. It's not as simple as that, the astrologer said. It wasn't. Now I've made it that simple, Rose said. I'm such a bitch, she thought. I privately agreed, but I wasn't sure I'd ever liked her more. So, I cackled out loud when I read that. It's the perfect ending to a chapter.
Yeah, like 100%. I had the same response. I actually laughed out loud because it's like it's so true. It's such a dick move, but like it's so necessary. I mean, again, we talked to death about this back when Blake was in Toronto. The way everyone avoids the problems is pretty shit. So dragging everyone under the bus like this, I think, is in a lot of ways a fair play. So yeah, it's a bitch move, absolutely, but that's what the situation called for, and I'm totally with Blake on his assessment of her self-assessment.
Yeah. So that's more or less the end of this chapter. Before we round it out, I want to give some credit where credit's due and point out a connection noticed by one of our listeners in the Discord from a bird who basically made a comment that what Rose has just done is put as many chess pieces on the board as possible, which is a direct inversion of Blake's strut like a pigeon and shit all over the board strategy that he talked about, an entire book ago?
That was early Arc 3.
Yeah, so that's just a fun little note that was spotted there.
I actually, I don't quite view them as opposites. I like it this way, because, Rose Senior also talked about this idea of, toppling the spinning top, and so how I view it is Rose has put as many chess pieces as she can on the board, and then she's unleashed the shitty strutting pigeon.
Yeah, true.
Like, she put everyone in a position where there's more things to topple, more collateral to happen.
Yeah.
And then she threw Blake into it, and she's like, do your worst.
Yeah, just shake it up and see what happens.
Yeah, and he did.
Yeah.
Spoilers for the last 15 arcs, but he did.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the end of 15.7 and the end of the non-interlude parts of this chapter.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up the episode, we wanted to dive into some comments from 5 years ago when people first read this chapter, see what people were talking about. Always love doing that.
Yeah, me too. What have you brought?
I've brought a comment by a user called Monsomel. Actually, this is more of a chain of comments. And it basically is discussing the question of, well, how bad is it that Barbatorum is possessing Johannes, right?
Yeah, I mean, the answer's obviously bad, but yes. This thread helps expand on all the reasons this is so.
Yes, I think the main one is access to the pipes, right? The pipes, while we don't know specifically what they've done, they clearly have the ability to control certain types of things, right? Children, mice, potentially dogs, and so we can at least assume that Barbatorum will have more or less direct control over Faysal, in addition to some other stuff. And this basically means that he's unstoppable, right? Like, the ability of Faysal to get him into any position that he wants to be in basically means that Barbatorum can get through any defenses that might have stopped him previously, and kind of just travel around wherever he wants.
Yeah, it definitely seems that once Miss Lewis goes away, getting Faysal unattached to the Barber is a high priority.
Yes, because that is quite bad.
Yeah, there are many ways a connection between those two could be used for very bad things.
Yes, so I think it really puts into perspective just why Faysal is suddenly on team Thorburn here, because otherwise he's basically going to be controlled into doing some really heinous shit, even for his standards.
Well, it explains why he was so grumpy when he showed up. Not that really needed explaining, I guess it's Faysal, but like you can see why he was just ready for all this to be over.
Yeah,
because that's a sore point for him right now, probably.
If his mission was to deal with Barbatorum and deal with Johannes' domain, he's basically just combined those two things into one much worse problem.
His plan has very much backfired, if Rose is right. He's now combined his two problems into one super problem that has control over him.
Yeah, so good work, Faysal.
Yeah, solid planning from Mr. Sneaky Boy over here.
Yeah.
I brought two small comments myself that I just thought both made some quick, good little points. So I got one by Snoof, who points out when all the people from Toronto show up, there's one who's just like a man that Blake doesn't recognize. And Snoof pointed out that we never met this Queen's man who was mentioned way back in Arc 4. And like, I totally remember the Queen's man and being really interested in who they were. I can't even remember why. I just remember thinking, God, I hope we see them one day. So that's got me very excited.
Yeah, fair enough.
And then another small comment from Yaglorba, who, shares my very optimistic theory that maybe Miss Lewis isn't giving it 100% right here because she does like the Thorburns. It's like I'm not putting my money on this being true, but I'm putting my heart on it being true.
Is that better or worse?
I don't know. It's probably stupider, but
yeah,
that's how I'm doing it.
I like this because, the fact is Mrs. Lewis has only summoned 4 to 5 motes, right? And those are explicitly like the weakest kind of demon. So it does seem like she's holding back a bit. And so hopefully that's because she's trying to, I don't know, play nice with them.
Yeah, I think Rose rationalized that last chapter as like if it was any big names, they'd probably already have connections to the Thorburns that Rose could leverage. But yeah, I don't know. It does kind of feel like Miss Lewis wasn't going 100%. Whether that's because of like, personal feelings she has or whether it's just the way she was meant to operate. I guess we'll see. I again, my money's not on her secretly being not that bad, but that's what I want to happen.
Yeah. I guess we will have to see next time on Deep In Pact. Because that's the end of our chapter. So thanks for joining us. If you want to leave your thoughts on this chapter, this arc, or this show in general, the place to do that is in our discussion thread, which we linked down in the show notes down below.
Yeah, that's where it's the best place to answer the discussion question we have right now. Which, as a reminder right now, is pick a demon or an evil spirit from any folklore and explain how it might operate in Pact and what choir it might belong to.
Yes, we've already gotten some great answers to this question, so I'm excited to see more. We pulled out a comment from a listener that was in our Discord today. If you want to check out some of the other great comments in our Discord, the way to get access to that is by supporting us on Patreon for just $1 a month or more. You're not just supporting us, you're supporting all of the great shows on the Doof Media Network, and you get access to a whole cornucopia of discussion.
Yeah, I know we say it a lot, and I'm pretty sure Matt and Scott say it a lot too, but the Discord's honestly like a great place.
Yes.
It is the best perk for supporting Doof, so it's definitely worth $1 in my opinion.
And not just that, it's got its own fresh stash of weird memes, GIFs, and emojis. So if you want to take part in that, it's just $1 a month or more.
Yeah, absolutely. And doofmedia.com is the place to go to learn about the other shows on the Doof Media Network. Tomorrow is the second episode of Kingslingers. I'm still halfway through the first, but I'm very much enjoying it.
Yes, it's been great to have an excuse to finally read more Stephen King stuff, because I've only ever read one Stephen King book, and this show is the perfect reason to get into it more.
Is the one you've read the Salem's Lot?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The one we talked about on Media MD.
Yeah, I was about to say that's my only one too, and you gave it to me. So
yes,
we're a couple of Stephen King fans over here. That's
it's weird because I absolutely love that book, but I've just never gotten into any other. Like I've never even tried to read any other Stephen King. So this is a very good podcast, and there's still time for you to get invested. All you have to do is listen to or read a book. It's not very hard. I'm sure you can do it. And yeah, it's a good show. So keep your eyes out on that on duffmedia.com.
Yes. And finally, we talked about our Patreon before. Walbo also has a Patreon. It's where you give him money for words, and we're 140 or whatever chapters into this story. We all like the Walbo words, so help him make more. Patreon.com/Walbo.
Yes, it's quite an arcane ritual whereby offering your gold, you can receive words regularly shipped to you. So in order to find out the ancient incantation to make this happen, head on to patreon.com/Walbo. But apart from that, that's our show. So we'll be back to talk about the interlude for Arc 15, that's 15.x, on Friday the 22nd. So we'll see you then.
See ya.